Okay, I think we can get started today. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. This webinar is being brought to you by the Secure Technology Alliance. The title of today's webinar is How to Plan, Procure, and Deploy a PIV-Enabled PACS. So my name is Randy Vanderhoof, and I'm the Executive Director of the Secure Technology Alliance, formerly known as the Smart Card Alliance. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for playback along with the presentation deck after the webinar has been concluded. There will be time at the end for questions, so I encourage listeners to submit their questions using the user dashboard on your screen. I'll return at the end of the presentation to lead the Q&A and encourage you to submit questions while the speakers are presenting, so we have time to organize them in advance so we can get to as many of them as we have time for. So let me first introduce the other presenters on today's webinar. So Lars Suneborn is Director of Training Programs for the Alliance and former Chair of the Access Control Council. And prior to joining the Alliance, spent many years as a PACS system engineer, sales, and security expert for several global security organizations. Also joining us today is Michael Kelley, who's Principal Electronic Security System Technical Specialist for the Parsons Corporation. And William Windsor is the IT Program Manager at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. All three of these gentlemen are active participants in the Access Control Council, one of the many councils within the Secure Technology Alliance. Next slide. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Secure Technology Alliance, here is a brief overview. So the Secure Technology Alliance is a not-for-profit multi-industry association working to stimulate the understanding, adoption, and widespread application of secure solutions. We do this in a collaborative, member-driven environment and provide education and information on how smart cards, embedded chip technology, and related hardware and software can be adopted across all markets in the United States. That's a very broad mission, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see the principal markets we focus these activities towards: access control, authentication, healthcare, identity management, Internet of Things, mobile, payments, and transportation, to name a few of them. And so as a cross-industry member-supported organization, we do the following things to bring together stakeholders to effectively collaborate on promoting secure solutions technologies and addressing industry challenges, publishing white papers and webinars, workshops, etc., creating conferences and events that focus on these specific markets and the emerging technologies in them. We do education and training and industry certifications to professional development of the subject matter experts in this industry. Provide networking opportunities for professionals to share ideas and knowledge, and we produce strong industry communications through our outreach, through our public relations, our web resources, and through the social media. Next slide. So shining the spotlight a little more focused on one of those activities, which is the Access Control Council. It has a more specific focus on accelerating the widespread acceptance, use, and application of secure technologies in various form factors for physical and logical access control. In doing so, this group brings together in an open forum leading users and technologists from both the public and private sectors. And on the right side is just a sampling of some of the resources that this group has produced over recent years, including white papers, reports, and guidance documents on various ID credentialing technologies, the FICAM roadmap and implementation guidance, understanding the FIPS 201 standards for use and access control, guidances for the architects and engineers to implement PACS in government and non-government facilities, role of smart cards and use of biometrics in access control systems, a focus on logical access control, and in use of PIV credentialing for mobile devices. The Access Control Council continues to do terrific work in providing free resources for the security industry on some of the major changes in the technology that are affecting the marketplace. So now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Lars Suneborn, who's going to provide you with some more details about the training center and our training programs. Lars?
Thank you very much, Randy. I'm Lars, and first of all, thank you so much for taking time of your schedule to participate in this series of webinars. We have created this in conjunction between the Access Control Council and our educational institute that operates here at the National Center for Advanced Payment and Identity Security. Next slide, please. And in the center here, we do conduct the certification training and exams that Randy just mentioned. And we have 4 programs that are predominant here. The first certification program is called CSCIP, and that stands for Certified Smart Card Industry Professional. That is a generic smart card secure technology type of approach. It covers topics like identity management, identity credentialing, identity lifecycle management, issuance, security, how are these identities stored in the secure element of the card, and use cases. We have a CSCIP-P for payment that is similar, but it is focused on the payment industry. And the content of that talks, of course, about payment methods, the new credit cards and debit cards that I'm sure that you have all seen, the terminals that are required to operate with a new card, the payment network and the network infrastructure, the changes of the payment processing organizations, payment systems, and this has a global audience. We in fact have had people to attend this payment from as far away as Indonesia and Africa. We have a CSCIP-G that is focused on government, and here in the United States, we are familiar with the PIV and the PIV-I credentials. So he talks about the PIV and the PIV-I data models, what is in the cards, how are they stored, how is the data protected, how is the identity bound strongly to the individual who is carrying the card, how does the system prevent this card from being used by a non-authorized user. We talk about some of the regulations and some of the federal requirements that is used when and governs the issuance and long-term life cycle management of the government credential. The certification that is most active, that we have the largest number of members of, is called CSEIP. That stands for Certified System Engineer ICAM PACS. This is a 3-day course, and the certification is a requirement for several agencies. A growing number of agencies have this certification as a prerequisite for organizations and people to even participate in bidding on an access control project. What we talk about here is how dramatically the physical access control systems have changed from what they used to do just a few years ago to what they are doing now to process and consume the credentials that we talked about and learn more about in the CSCIP-G. So the two of them tie very nicely together. What we talk about here is the cryptographic tools, how they must be interfaced and what the systems must do to process the credentials correctly. And the system design and system configuration is tremendously different from what it used to be just a few years ago. And with this, I also like to end this with that the PACS, the physical access control systems, are now considered to be a component of the federal IT infrastructure. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Bill Windsor from DHS. He'll cover it from here. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Lars. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Windsor. I work in the Department of Homeland Security, as mentioned several times now. I serve in a role as the PACS Modernization Program Manager. The statement you see in front of you today is an excerpt from the most recent A130 document released in August of 2016. The statement declares that PACS systems are now IT assets. Compliance to this is no longer an option Although some agencies do apply the FSMA practices today for their PACS systems, this is going to change the landscape to a 100% accountability for executive branch agencies. The good news is this is not an impossible feat. Next slide, please. So for compliance requirements, OMB directives such as this are considered operational and budgetary in nature, with an effective authority that's one level down from being a presidential directive. So it's a pretty powerful statement. This is a significant authority. This particular directive requires executive branch agencies to manage their PACS investments as IT assets, to include FSMA accreditation, IT modernization, and recapitalization. These directives can impact agencies' budgets if the requirements are not being met. Many requirements, documents, and standards have emerged as a result of HSPD 12, affecting how we use PACS, how we perform procurements for PACS solutions, product development on the part of the manufacturers, certification requirements on the system integrators. Lars just spoke about the different certification categories we have today, and system development and operations, which should be engaging a growing number of stakeholders. We will discuss stakeholders in just a few slides. As we advance to the next slide, Mike Kelley will talk to us about the challenges we face on the road ahead. Next slide, please. There you go.
Thanks, Bill. Good afternoon, everyone. I know I've met some of you, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Kelley. As Randy said, I'm an ESS technical specialist with Parsons. I have over 30 years of system integration experience, working exclusively in the security identity management industry for the last 17 years. Most of the work has been in the federal government. In addition to being a member of the Alliance Access Control Council Steering Committee, I hold the Alliance CSCIPG and CSEIP certifications. I also hold the Physical Security Professional certification from ASIS International and the Certified Biometric Professional certification from IEEE. Bill talked about why this needs to be done. HSPD 12 was signed over 13 years ago, but there's still many places where it hasn't been fully implemented. The focus shifted from proofing, vetting, and card issuance to card use years ago. GSA, OMB, and others spent a lot of time and money trying to increase compliance, but it's still lacking, especially for physical access control. The question has to be why. Achieving compliance may be difficult, but it's not impossible. It just requires better planning and management. So let's talk about three of the bigger challenges for a minute. First, each facility is unique, so there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each facility has a different organizational structure governing how it works on a day-to-day basis, and each one performs different functions. In an ideal world, the functions would all complement one another, but that's not normally the case. The functions have to be prioritized. Sometimes trade-offs are needed, and it's difficult to build a consensus, especially in a multi-tenant facility. The facilities also operate with different constraints. I don't know, can any of you point to a facility with an unlimited security budget? I seriously doubt it. I know I can't. How about the time or the schedule? Physical access control impacts every person entering the facility. It's not reasonable to expect your project won't have any impact on operations, but it needs to be minimized to the best of your abilities. The existing conditions at each facility are different too, both from a technical and an operational perspective. System effectiveness will vary depending on the age of the system, how well it's maintained, its supportability, and the environment it operates in. Operational effectiveness is impacted by the number of people monitoring and responding to the alarms and by their education, skill, and experience. The second challenge is what I refer to as the moving target. No environment is static. Just look at the evolution of the HSPD 12 standards as an example. Many of them are in their third or fourth revisions, and some of those changes were significant. The only good piece of news is that the changes were rolled out very slowly and implemented gradually. The organizations and functions at a facility constantly change too. Those changes and other external factors also mean the associated risk constantly changes. The first two challenges lead us right into the third one. That's the tendency to try and achieve compliance all at once. Trying to do that makes the task too large, too inflexible to respond to the constraints and the continual changes I just mentioned. NIST Special Publication 800-116 was the first document to recognize this with the PIV implementation maturity model. At the time, it was only a recommendation, and it may not have been perfect fit for every situation, but it still made a valid point. You can't achieve compliance overnight. It doesn't matter how big or small the facility is. Success requires proper planning. Next slide, please. So that's where this webinar comes in. We want to provide you with a framework that breaks the arguably challenging process of achieving compliance into smaller, easily manageable pieces, each with well-crafted plans that don't have to be rewritten from scratch each time. The process has to be repeatable, and it accounts for the differences I spoke about earlier, so it's flexible enough to be used at any facility, regardless of the size, organization, function, or budget. Each step in the framework has a specific purpose, and each step requires people with different skills and experiences. One of the key elements of a successful project is identifying and assembling a qualified cross-functional team. Bill will talk about that here in a second. As the series progresses, we'll also talk about the federal policies and regulations that impact how you procure, deploy, install, configure, test, operate, and maintain your PACS. They extend way beyond the HSPD 12 standards, and they include things like privacy, cybersecurity, and acquisition, just to name a few. Finally, the framework we present here was designed to align and complement the playbooks published by GSA. Alliance members made significant contributions to the development of these playbooks, and they're another resource that can help you achieve compliance. You can get copies using the link we included on the slide. Our overall goal is to give you tools to develop a program that moves towards compliance and reduces risks to the facility as efficiently as possible. You notice I didn't say the objective is to eliminate risk. None of you have unlimited budgets, and you all have schedules to meet, so the objective is to buy down as much risk as possible for every dollar or day you spend. Senior leadership in your organization will determine how much risk they're willing to accept, how much they're willing to devote in terms of resources, and what trade-offs they're willing to make. Next slide, please. We'll dive deeper into each of the 5 steps you see here as the series progresses. In the first step, facility characterization. That's where we establish our baseline for both the facility and the organization. We want to look at the functions a facility performs, the things it needs to be successful, and how well it's performing those functions currently. It's important to look at this from both an operational and a technical perspective, so we'll also evaluate the existing systems. We want to know what equipment is installed, how old it is, how well it's operating, whether it's supportable or not, and what, if any, pieces may be able to remain. It's not uncommon for PACS systems today to interface with other systems like CCTV or intrusion detection, so you want to identify those systems during this process as well. We want to minimize the operational impact of any changes and leverage the existing technologies wherever possible. The policies, procedures, and technology all need to work together if they're going to be effective. So going through this process helps everyone involved to understand what is being done and, more importantly, why it's being done. Once we have the baseline, we look at the risks of the facility and, more importantly, how well those risks are currently mitigated. Since risk is the product of consequence and likelihood, it's important to understand that access control is only one mitigation tool. It generally mitigates risk by reducing the likelihood. In some cases, specific risks may be more efficiently or more effectively reduced by reducing the consequence instead. For example, by eliminating reliance on a single asset or resource. Looking at the big picture ensures we're spending resources allocated for access control where they're really needed. The scope of the project is scope development is where the information from the facility characterization and the risk assessment come together to provide information senior leadership needs to make the types of trade-off decisions I mentioned earlier. The scope of your project will become clear as decisions about what risks to mitigate or accept are made and what resources you'll have available to you. You'll begin to look at potential solutions. The GSA FIPS 201 evaluation program provides a list of products that have been independently tested. You're required to buy products on that list, so the options have already been pared down for you somewhat. Makes your life a lot easier. You'll also be able to eliminate options that don't meet some of the other requirements you have identified. Finally, you'll begin to look at potential equipment and service providers to assist you in your project. That's where the CSEIP certification comes into play. With a well-defined scope, we can develop our procurement strategy. We need to determine what work will be performed in-house and what work will require outside assistance. We'll also determine what types of procurement vehicles we're going to use. Will they be, for example, open procurements? Will they be off of a GSA schedule? Will any of them be set-asides? Any of those types of things, a number of federal acquisition requirements. And we'll start preparing our contract documents, requests for information, requests for proposals, independent government cost estimates, things along those lines, determining how much funding we have available, make sure it matches our IGCE. We'll also figure out how we're going to, what criteria we're going to use to evaluate the proposals we receive and determine exactly how the award is going to be made, the procurement strategy itself. Once we get a contract award, we'll move into deployment, management of the project as a whole. What information do we need to report? How often do we need to report it? How do we manage progress? Not only to senior leadership, but also to stakeholders. All the stakeholders, even everybody that enters your facility day in, day out has a play in this. So, knowing where and what to expect will go a long way towards acceptance of the project. You also have a plan for installation and configuration. Most cases, if not all the cases, you'll be actually replacing an existing system. That's just not going to happen overnight. You'll have certain transition periods and phases, not only for the equipment itself, but for some of the existing data. How do you bind some of the existing data to new credential information that you're getting, things along those lines. And your deployment plan also has to address how you're going to test and accept this system. That should be carried over from your procurement documents. Finally, you talk about, you'll include things about how individuals are going to be trained, not only for operators, but for system administrators and those types of things, and even card holders themselves. For many, this presents a new way of learning, especially when you get into some of the additional authentication mechanisms that the PIV card provides. And you'll talk about the cutover, the data migration, things along those lines. And then finally, you'll talk about, you'll include in your deployment plan, actual closeout, how you're going to close out the process, the project, and how you claim and prove success of the project, and get ready to move on into the next round in the process. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bill, and Bill's going to talk a little bit about the stakeholders themselves.
One minor correction. I'm going to talk a lot about our stakeholders.
Okay.
So as you can tell from the information we've shared so far today, what the impacts can be in your organizations, we have a multitude of stakeholders that this has an ability to either affect through usage or through effect of planning a project or implementation of a project. I'm going to walk through a little bit of these different stakeholders and give some recommendations as to what roles they may play and hopefully provoke interest that you can share within your organizations with the appropriate people as it plays into their area of expertise. So we'll start with acquisition. We really depend on our acquisition folks to do the directing of our proper sourcing methodologies, whether it's using a GSA schedule or potentially using one of the special item numbers that have been created under the Federal Acquisition Service. They have specialized categories to get to specific types of products that may be leveraged here today. They also provide guidance in preparing our acquisitions, making certain that our acquisitions are in order, not only with the FAR, but it's in order that if we actually match the requirements of the approved products list, what's needed by our facilities, whether they are owned or leased facilities. Lastly, in acquisition, protection of confidential proposal information, which may include intellectual property and pricing data. Moving along to budget, we depend on our budget folks to guide us when we're doing our funding projections, not only from the development of those initial costs, but also through the execution phase. They're the folks we need besides to make sure that our projects are on task and that we have the dollars that we need to support it through completion. Customers and tenants, we want to communicate to our customers what's the rationale behind the project, making certain that they are aware of what's taking place and the reasons behind it. Make sure that they're comfortable with the changes. This also gives us the greatest opportunity to reduce any chance of inadvertent bypass. Advertisement, campaigning, making sure information's out there to answer the kinds of questions that people sometimes just simply do not ask. Engineering, protection of property, leveraging their knowledge for the installation. These are the folks that we're going to turn to when it comes to time for installation of cable and so forth. They're going to be a big help to us. Facilities management, they're going to take care of us on the critical infrastructure side of things. They're going to work hand in hand with us on power, water, HVAC systems, and so forth. Some of our facilities, as many of you probably know, are often considered protected properties. So that could be a factor as well that comes into play on this one. Our information technology folks. Since PACS is now an IT asset, it seems very natural to me that we want to make certain that we have our IT folk involved from the get-go for building us the necessary infrastructure. This may include hosting or network capability that we'll need to be able to not only establish the system, but also create it in such a way that we have a system that can run confidently every day and do what's needed to do proper authentication for access management. We also want to use our IT folks to protect the physical and information assets that we now have just spoke about, treat as the IT assets themselves. Anything to do with management of FSMA and making certain that the proper controls are in place, that we have access for the individuals. Managing the system, the information that's being leveraged to grant access is being protected, and making certain that everything is in a state of operation, a sanctity, and it's not going to fall in the hands of the wrong folks. Our legal folks will be there for us to help with privacy impact assessments and systems of record notice. This is extremely important in the day and age that we live in. Data sensitivity is a big deal for us these days. They're going to be there to help us make certain that the data we're using and any sensitivity associated with it is being properly managed, that we're reporting to the customers that we're serving what data is being used and how it's being used. They'll also be there to help us with our Americans Disability Act coverage, ensuring that we have the proper solutions in place to support all of our ADA needs, whether it's the turnstile, whether it's the audible systems that we use, whether it's the placement of card readers that we get to. They're going to be there to help us make certain that we're maintaining the objectivity of that. Personnel is going to be beside us to help us protect the personal identifiable information, or PII, as we so easily call it, often associated with the issuance of PIV credentials, or PIV-I in some cases. Physical security, these are the folks that we're going to depend on to do the day-to-day operation. They're going to be provisioning the physical access privileges that will be used by our customers and tenants. They're going to monitor the system for system events. That may include granting or denials. It may include some sort of change in system status where we potentially have left a door open or we've lost a reader. They're going to be our eyes on folks. They're also going to be there to help us detect and potentially react to any sort of incident that occurs within the environment. Last but not least is our life safety folks. When we pull all of this together, we have many, many ties back to fire and life safety systems to make certain that if there is an event, that our turnstiles are doing what's necessary to make sure that we can have an immediate emergency type egress from a facility as needed. I'm going to hand you off now to Lars one more time, and Lars is going to take us through a discussion on the remainder of our webinar sessions that are before us. At that time, he's also going to go over a list of the webinars and how we might associate the stakeholders to those webinars.
Thank you, Bill. The remainder of the sessions that we have here, I will show you this on this slide here, the schedule and the main topics. And on the next slide, I'll talk to you how this maps into the various stakeholders that we have talked about. Session number 2, that's the facility characterization assessment. And I'll drill more into this, what that entails in the next slide here. Session number 3, that's on January 11. So as you see here, we skip December due to the fact that there's so much other activity going on in the month of December that people usually have a hard time breaking away for a webinar. So the facility characterization, that will take place November 30. That's the second session. Session number 3, January 11. That would be then establishing the project scope. We heard some of the details described by Bill here, what that entails. Session number 4, February 22nd. That is the developing the procurement strategy. And I think that is something that should be of interest of a large number of people on the call here today and hopefully on the future calls too. Session number 5, that's March 15. That's the implementation. And that's how we do then the implementation and the deployment of the solutions. And session number 6, April 19, use cases and lessons learned. All the webinars will begin at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. So Mike, please flip to the next slide. So what we have here is a cross matrix. And we have here to the left, a column of the stakeholders that we had identified. And then we have different columns of the different sessions. And the rows, we have put a little mark on the stakeholders and the groups that we think might be interested in that. So session number 1, that's the one we're doing now. That's the introduction of the rest of the sessions. And as you see here, we have marked everybody down for that. Session number 2, at the end of November, that is the facility characterization. And what we have done there is, what kind of mission do we have? What kind of assets do we have here? Establish the risk to the facility and identify threats to those assets, perhaps even the likelihood of each one of these threats. And we then do the risk assessment, and the risk, that equals then the likelihood of an attack and the consequence of an attack to that particular resource. That's session number 2. Session number 3, that is the project scope. And we identify there what risk will be mitigated. So that's the critical part of the project scope. And determine how effective those mitigation techniques are. Identify the potential solutions. So there may be PACS, there might be CCTV, there might be other things here that are physical security systems related. And then we're going to identify here potential product and system solutions and solution providers. And that's session number 3. Session number 4, that is going to be February 22nd. On February 4th, develop the procurement strategy. That is then determine the responsibility for all the different phases and all the different steps in the entire project. Design, installation, testing, cutover operation, like we heard Bill talk about here and Mike talk about. Standards, what standards do we need to do? And then the procurement vehicles, what can be used for this? Schedule 70, Schedule 84. And then draft contract documents, and I think that's something that should be of interest to quite a few people here. Schedule number 4, and that will be February 22nd. We have then session number 5. Oh, and I should also say here that schedule number 4, obtain funding. That's part of schedule of session 4 here too. Evaluate the proposals and then the contract award consideration. So session number 5, implement the solution. That is establish the implementation and deployment schedule, develop the monitoring and the reporting plan so that you have some way to gauge the process of the implementation. test the equipment, training, cutover that we heard discussed here a little bit earlier, and life cycle management processes, who is going to be doing this. And that will be session number 5. Session number 6, that is going to be an entirely different format and a different protocol. What we have there is a live discussion of lessons learned. And we have different components in here. We have different user groups. We have both system manufacturers, we have system integrators, installation companies, engineering companies, and then we have a group of federal agencies with people who have managed and been the recipient of these compliance solutions. And I think that is going to be an excellent way to cap up this series of webinars. And with that, Randy, we are a little bit ahead of schedule here. I don't think anyone is going to object too much to having a little bit more time to submit questions and answers. So Randy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lars. And also my sincere thanks to Michael and Bill for this content. So what you just heard today was a high-level session to raise the awareness of what the policies are governing government EPACS systems and who are some of the stakeholders. And as Lars mentioned, the remaining webinars are going to go deeper into the details that impact each of those stakeholder groups, and ending with a live roundtable discussion that kind of wraps up and summarizes all of the work that the council has done in terms of providing this education and awareness about EPACS solutions. So we would encourage you to continue to sign up and participate in future webinars, and to share this information and invitation to your colleagues and associates in the industry and in government, so that other people who may not be aware of this will be able to participate and join in and learn from the subject matter expertise that we're gathering for this purpose. So we do have some time for a few more questions. Again, I would encourage anyone that still has questions either to direct them to the individual presenter, or just send the question along and we'll let the presenters answer them as they come in. And we'll do that for the next 10 minutes or so. First question is for you, Bill, and it's why in the OMB Circular A130 that you led off the webinar with, does OMB define physical access control systems as information systems?
So the A130 was updated technically in August, was released in September, and it goes to the management and responsibilities associated with protecting and managing federal information resources. Because OMB and NIST and many federal agencies have recognized that PACS systems are in fact enterprise resources that are used in both large and small instances, it became a very natural thought, i.e. correlation, to making it an enterprise asset as such. The way OMB looks at managing those larger resources, or these IT assets, is to put behind it the normalcy that we see when we look at IT system management. It includes everything from devising the system to making plans for IT recapitalization, to how we deploy, how we manage the data and so forth. Many of the topics I touched on when we spoke about the IT side of things, and we spoke about the legal aspect of the information we've shared today. There's a lot of detail in the updated A130. I'm more than happy to make that available to this group, my apologies, to this group, and we can get that distributed out to you if that's of any assistance. And I can point out the verbiage that's here. The one thing I will say, and I apologize for being a little long-winded here, the one thing I will say, the blurb that they make on physical access control is rather brief. The association actually goes to a NIST standard update or a special publication update, which tells us how we should deploy enterprise PACS systems. That and the combination of recognizing this as an enterprise capability has put enough onus behind it to start managing these things in accordance with this update. I hope that answers the question. If it does not, please feel free to expand upon the question. I'll do my best to try and provide a better answer should it need be.
Thank you, Bill. And actually, there's been a couple of questions that have come in with interest in this OMB A130. Lars, can you touch on a little bit about what the Access Control Council recently published and where people could find the document that we reviewed and provided commentary on with regard to the update to the A130?
Right. Yes. Absolutely. The OMB A130 is quite a long document, and it covers quite a few different areas. So what we did in the Access Control Council, we took a look at this, we read it, we analyzed it, we digested it, and we came up with a shorter version of this that was more relevant specifically for PACS applications. And we created a shorter version of that OMB document. That is available for free for download from the Secure Technology Alliance on the under the Access Control Council documentation. It is free. It's full of, I think, very good information. And I'd like to add something here to the discussion here too. OMB operates with updates to publications, and there was an update that went into effect October 1, just 2 weeks ago. And that update now adds a new requirement for the agency's CIO, for the CIOs of the different agencies. The new update, the new requirement, compels the CIO for all the agencies to report to OMB as a percentage the number of PACS readers that are on the APL, the GSA approved product list, as a percentage. So there are two questions on this. And this document that contains these two updates is called the FISMA metrics. FISMA metrics has 2 points. One, as a percentage of the total number of readers, what readers are on the APL? And B, those readers are supported by what certificate validation system infrastructure? So these are two very specific questions that are directly focused on PACS. That is in an attempt to get the reporting and the auditing more visibility to the CIO, and therefore enhance the enforcement of the various federal regulations that governs PACS and directs the PACS to FICAM compliant equipment.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Lars. Next question is for Mike. And Mike, in context, the slide that you had, which showed all of the different steps to get through the procurement process, when you are talking about scoping out the requirements prior to procurement, what are some of the considerations that government security site managers need to be conscious of when implementing a compliant EPACS solution?
So from just totally exclusively limiting it to PACS, some of the things that you want to look at are the actual spaces themselves, the security categorization of the space. So is it a controlled space, limited space, exclusion area? The access control points into those spaces, whether direct or indirect, the authentication mechanisms that you'll use to gain access to each one of those spaces. One of the things that the PIV card provides that no other access control technology has ever provided is multiple authentication mechanisms, 1, 2, and 3 factor. So knowing where those factors are going to be deployed and how they're going to be deployed is part of the scope that you would do to mitigate some of your risks.
Great, thank you, Michael. Bill, another question for you. When is it appropriate to include the department responsible for single sign-on and other logical access functions within the agency when you're reaching out to the list of stakeholders that you need to engage for speccing out a PACS solution?
So answering specifically on the question of single sign-on capability, there is no direct correlation between what we do with physical access and PIV credentials and how they get used within the desktop or laptop computers we use in the Fed. What I do as a program manager is I try to seek information as early as possible. When I know that I'm building a project that's going to use the same PIV credential, the same types of data that's been leveraged for these logical access systems, I go do my homework by talking to my friends in the CIO shop, and I ask about the data that they're using and what's available to me to take advantage of. At DHS, we do an identity brokering capability. So I try to get with those folks and I talk about the inference of using that system and the system that I want to connect to. And then we work through the conversation of how do we connect that identity brokering capability over to the PACS product itself. And then we start to develop a project plan to actually make rubber meet the road.
Okay, thank you. So this question, I'm going to leave it open to anyone to answer. Is there an integrator playbook of sorts that integrators can refer along with the individual agency contacts during the time of actual implementation and support resources during the course of the project to eliminate the guesswork?
So I almost feel like I need to speak up here. And gentlemen, please join me. I'm not aware of an integration playbook that exists today. I know that there has been some discussion of doing something like that. Generally speaking, if we have that type of a guide available, it's likely not going to engage the POCs that are involved in a project. It's going to be really more about the systematic side of things and what it's going to take to be able to affect a good project. Generally speaking, we would have that engagement, and if we are working along in a positive manner, it's going to become a real live project. At that point in time, I think we would begin to share the involved parties' information, and that would include the decision makers that are involved in pushing our project forward.
Right. This is Mike from the perspective of the playbooks. In addition to the GSA, I think this is where some of the CSEIP training comes in as well. Another resource, although there's not a comprehensive technical integration playbook per se, the Smart Card Alliance Access Control Council has done a number of white papers over the years talking about different aspects of HSPD 12 credential integration. So that would be another potential resource for you.
Yep, Mike, thank you for that. I was going to mention the different certifications that we have here. And this segues and ties nicely together with what we just talked about, the OMB and the reporting responsibility that now is on the agency CIO. I have done an informal poll of the various access control system manufacturers that are on our membership and asked them, as the percentage of systems that you sold in the past year to the federal agencies, what percentage is actually conformant with all the regulations versus what percentage has been legacy equipment that the agencies keep buying. The percentage of conformant system is very low. So I can tell you from firsthand here that this reporting structure is going to put some spotlight on this and enhance and accelerate the pressure and increase the pressure of agencies to become compliant. One of the things that I've heard from OMB is that when they get the report in from their people at the various agencies, they have a higher number of equipment that is compliant. And I pointed out to them that it is very deceptive. Just because somebody can present or hold up a PIV card or a PIV-I card to a reader, get some data off of that card and register it in the system and be granted access, that does not necessarily mean that the system is compliant. So there is some information that we need to spread out to shed light on that issue, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this series of webinars. And the CSEIP certification people certainly understands what the difference is and can identify if the system is actually compliant and behave as it should, or if it is just something that gets small pieces of data of a PIV card that is then registered and provisioned in the access control system. There's a big difference, but to the layman, it's not clear. Present a PIV card to the system, get through the door, you're compliant. That's far from the truth. So a little bit long-winded here, but the bottom line is this: I think that when the reporting tools are now being strengthened and the interest from various organizations is beginning to audit this, I believe that we have a lot of work ahead of us, and there's going to be quite a few more systems and quite a few more agencies that really and we are not compliant. We need to do something about this.
Okay, thanks, Lars. And I think we are done with the questions that we received today. So we're going to let you folks get a few minutes of your hour back. Just a reminder that I said at the beginning, this webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available for you to listen to the playback as well as receive a copy of the slide deck that was used by our presenters. And you are on our list for invitees for the future webinars. If you do get an invitation and it's a topic that you personally may not particularly have interest in, or because of your busy schedules are not available to participate, it would help us out a lot and help your industry a lot if you would forward that on to other people in your organization who might benefit from that. So please take some time to consider that. So I will sign off and thank you again, Lars and Michael and William, for your terrific participation and content here, and say goodbye to everyone today. And please join us again for the next webinar that's coming up in a few weeks. Have a good day.